welcome. You've made it. Maybe the day was loud. Maybe your thoughts still are. But now you're here at midnight. A quiet place to relax while I tell you ancient stories. Tonight's story isn't just ancient, it's absolutely strange. Gods with beetle heads, souls being judged by a feather, a sun that needs to be pushed across the sky by a scarab. Some of these myths make no sense, and yet they were believed for thousands of years. So come closer. Let me tell you the weirdest things ancient Egypt ever imagined. And if sleep finds you first, that's okay. Some myths finish themselves. And if you enjoy nights like this, feel free to support the channel with a calm little click on subscribe. It's free, and it helps this quiet corner grow. Let's begin. The light is fading now over the ancient sands. The sun, that great golden disk that has watched over Egypt for thousands upon thousands of years, sinks slowly toward the western horizon. In the distance, the pyramids rise like sleeping giants, their limestone faces catching the last amber rays of day. This is a time when shadows grow long and mysterious, when the desert wind carries whispers of stories older than memory, when the Nile reflects not just sky, but the dreams of a civilization that saw gods in everything, in the flight of birds, in the rolling of beetles, in the rising and setting of stars. Everything here moves differently than in our world. Time flows like honey. Thoughts drift like incense smoke. The very air seems heavy with meaning, thick with symbols that speak to parts of the mind that daylight never touches. This was a world ruled by gods with animal heads and human hearts. Gods who loved and quarreled and made mistakes, just like mortals, but on a scale that could reshape the cosmos. Gods who were both magnificent and ridiculous, both terrifying and strangely comforting. The ancient Egyptians looked at their world and saw not random chaos, but patterns, stories, reasons for why the sun rises, why the moon changes shape, why death comes to all living things. Their answers were strange by our standards, impossible even, but they were their own kind of beautiful. And here are some of their most bizarre stories. Let them wash over you like gentle waves on the shore of consciousness. Let their strangeness become familiar, their impossibility become soothing. These are dreams carved in stone, myths that have outlasted the pyramids themselves. Close your eyes if you wish. Let the ancient world unfold behind your eyelids like a slow, blooming lotus flower. In the beginning of each day, before the first bird sings, before the first flower opens to catch the light, there is movement in the eastern sky. Something vast and patient begins its daily work, pushing the sun across the heavens like a craftsman rolling precious metal into shape. The ancient Egyptians knew who this was. They had seen his earthly cousins at work in the sand and dirt, rolling balls of dung with single-minded devotion. Small, dark beetles that spent their lives in constant motion, pushing spheres much larger than themselves across the desert floor. And in this simple act, the Egyptians saw something sacred. The god's name was Khepri, and he had the head of a scarab beetle. His body was human, strong, and patient, but his head was that of a creature most people would step on without thinking. Yet to the Egyptians, he was beautiful, divine, the engine that kept the world turning. Every morning, Kipri would take the sun, that burning golden ball of life-giving fire, and begin to roll it across the sky, not carrying it, not flying with it, but rolling it, like a cosmic dung beetle with a cosmic ball of, well, light instead of dung. But the principle was the same. Hour by hour, with steady patience, he would push it from east to west. When the sun was high at noon, blazing down on the desert sands, that was Kipri at the height of his strength. When it sank low in the afternoon, casting long shadows across the temples, that was Kipri growing tired from his daily labor. The scribes and priests who recorded this myth knew how it sounded. They understood that other people might laugh at the idea of a beetle-headed god pushing the sun like a ball of dung. But they also knew something else, that the sacred often wears the costume of the ridiculous, that the divine can be found in the humblest activities. The scarab beetle, after all, lays its eggs in dung. The baby beetles emerge from what seems like dead matter, appearing as if from nowhere, as if spontaneously generated by some mysterious force. To people who had never seen microscopic life, who knew nothing of bacteria and decomposition, this seemed like pure magic, life from death, being from non-being. So when they looked up at the sun, that daily miracle that brought life to everything on earth, it made perfect sense that it too was moved by the power of the beetle. The sun died each evening and was reborn each morning, just like the scarab larvae emerging from their dung balls. In the tomb paintings, you can see Kipri depicted with loving care. Artists who spent their lives creating images of pharaohs and queens gave the same attention to the beetle god. His shell gleams with gold leaf. His legs are painted with perfect precision. His great black eyes hold depths of cosmic patience. Sometimes he is shown inside the sun itself, the beetle head visible within the burning disk as it rolls across the sky. Sometimes he stands alone, arms outstretched in a gesture of eternal effort, forever pushing the light from darkness into day. And perhaps there is something beautiful in this image, something that speaks to the part of us that understands what it means to do necessary work, day after day, without recognition or reward. The part that knows that the most important tasks are often the least glamorous ones. The sun rises every morning because someone or something makes sure it does, not through grand gestures or magnificent displays, but through simple, steady effort, like a beetle rolling a ball across the sand, like a god who chooses to wear the humble face of an insect and do the work that keeps the world alive. Each sunrise is Kepri's gift to the world. Each day is another turn of his cosmic wheel. And when evening comes and the sun sinks into the western desert, he does not rest. He simply prepares to begin again, as he has every day since time began, as he will every day until time ends. The sun rolls across the sky, pushed by the god with the beetle's head. Strange? Yes. Sacred? Absolutely. There was a time when the gods grew tired of humanity, not annoyed, not disappointed, truly, deeply tired. The people had grown careless with their worship, casual about their offerings, forgetful of the proper respect due to divine beings. They went about their daily lives as if the gods were just stories, just names carved on temple walls. Ra, the sun god, decided something had to be done. Not a flood that was too quick, too clean. Not a plague that lacked artistry. No, this called for something more personal, more intense. He called upon his daughter, Sekhmet. She had the head of a lioness and the heart of a warrior. Her breath was the hot desert wind. Her roar could shake mountains. When she walked, even other gods stepped aside. She was beautiful in the way that fire is beautiful, magnificent, necessary, and absolutely deadly if you got too close. Go, Ra told her. Remind them why they should remember us. Sekhmet smiled, showing teeth like white daggers. She descended to earth in the heat of the day, when the sun was highest and most merciless. Her paws touched the sand, and where they landed, the ground cracked with thirst. She began her work with enthusiasm. At first, it was almost surgical. A merchant who cheated pilgrims visiting temples, a priest who pocketed offerings meant for the gods, a nobleman who blasphemed against divine names. Each death was swift, just, deserved. But Sekhmet discovered something about herself that day, something that perhaps she had always known but never admitted. She liked the work, not just the justice of it, but the act itself, the power, the fear in human eyes, the sweet metallic taste of blood. One justified killing became two, two became 10, 10 became 100. Soon she was no longer choosing her targets carefully. Anyone would do. The guilty and innocent alike fell beneath her claws. She stalked through villages like a wildfire, leaving nothing alive in her wake. Her mane grew matted with blood. Her eyes began to glow with a light that had nothing to do with righteousness and everything to do with hunger. The other gods watched in growing alarm. This was not punishment. This was extermination. At the rate she was going, there would be no humans left to worship anyone. They approached Ra. You have to stop her, they said. She's not listening to reason. She's drunk on the killing. Ra tried calling to his daughter, but she ignored him. He sent messengers, but she tore them apart before they could speak. He commanded her to stop, but she was beyond commands now. She had become something more primal than divine authority. She had become appetite itself. Finally, Thoth the Wise had an idea. We can't stop her by force, he said, but maybe we can trick her. The plan was simple, but required perfect timing. They gathered all the red ochre they could find, the clay that potters used to make their jars the color of dried blood. They ground it fine and mixed it with the strongest beer in all of Egypt. Barrels and barrels of beer, stained red as fresh blood, sweet with honey and thick with grain. Under cover of darkness, while Sekhmet rested briefly between massacres, they flooded the fields where she would hunt next, not with water, but with beer. Red beer that looked exactly like the pools of blood she had been creating. When dawn came, Sekhmet woke with her usual hunger. She saw the red pools stretching to the horizon and purred with satisfaction. So much blood, more than she had spilled even in her most frenzied nights. She bent her great head and began to drink. The first taste was strange, but not unpleasant, different from blood, but satisfying in its own way. She drank more. The red liquid was everywhere, pools of it, rivers of it. She had never seen so much blood in one place. Surely she could drink just a little more. The alcohol hit her slowly at first, then all at once. Her steps became unsteady. Her roars became slurred. The world began to spin gently around her, and the burning rage that had driven her for days began to cool. She found herself thinking not of killing, but of music. of dancing, of how beautiful the sunrise looked, reflecting off all this lovely red. Beer? Was it beer? When had it become beer? By midday, the goddess of war and vengeance was lying on her side in a field of grain, hiccuping softly and watching clouds drift across the sky. Her mane was still matted with blood, but her eyes had returned to their normal divine radiance. The madness had passed. When she woke the next morning with what must have been the first hangover in divine history, she remembered everything. The shame struck her harder than any physical blow. She had nearly destroyed the species she was meant to protect. From that day forward, Sekhmet became a different kind of goddess, still fierce, still protective, but tempered now with wisdom. She became a healer as well as a warrior, using her knowledge of death to better understand life. The priests who served her learned to mix medicine with music, treatment with celebration. And every year, at the festival of intoxication, the people of Egypt would drink red beer in her honor, not to celebrate violence, but to remember that even gods can lose their way, and that sometimes the best cure for rage is simply to sleep it off. The lioness learned to laugh. The goddess learned to drink, and humanity learned that divine wrath, like all things, must eventually come to an end. When your last breath leaves your body, when your eyes close for the final time, when the warm pulse of life stills forever in your chest, that is not the end of your story. In ancient Egypt, it was barely the beginning. Your soul, that invisible essence that made you who you were, would find itself standing in a place unlike anywhere in the living world. The Hall of Two Truths, they called it. A vast chamber with walls that stretched up beyond sight, lit by a light that came from everywhere and nowhere. At the center of this hall stood a scale, not a merchant's scale for weighing grain, not a jeweler's scale for measuring gold. This was the scale of cosmic justice, its crossbeam forged from the bones of truth itself, its plates hammered from metal that had never known the touch of mortal hands. Anubis waited beside the scale, the jackal-headed god whose job it was to guide souls through this final test. His dark eyes held compassion, but also an implacable commitment to accuracy. He had been doing this work since the first human died, and he had never made a mistake. "Are you ready?" he would ask each soul, and his voice carried the patience of eternity. On one side of the scale, Anubis would place your heart, not the physical heart that had pumped blood through your body, but the spiritual heart, the seat of your consciousness, the record of every choice you had ever made. This heart carried weight that had nothing to do with flesh and blood. It carried the weight of your actions, your intentions, your moments of kindness and cruelty, and everything in between. On the other side of the scale, he would place a single feather. A feather, something so light it could be blown away by a child's breath, something that seemed to weigh nothing at all. This was the feather of Mot, the goddess of truth and justice. It represented something the ancient Egyptians understood better than we do, that truth is not heavy. Truth is simple, pure, light as air. It is our complications, our justifications, our lies to ourselves and others that add weight to the soul. If you had lived well, if you had been honest in your dealings, kind to those weaker than yourself, faithful to your promises, generous with your good fortune, then your heart would be light, light as truth itself. The scale would balance perfectly, or your heart might even rise, lighter than the feather that measured it. But if you had lived poorly, if you had lied for gain, hurt others for pleasure, broken faith for convenience, hoarded wealth while others starved, then your heart would be heavy. Heavy with the accumulated weight of choices that put your desires above truth, your comfort above others' well-being. The scale never lied. It could not be bribed, could not be fooled, could not be influenced by smooth words or good intentions that came too late. It measured not what you meant to do, but what you actually did, not what you planned to become, but who you actually were. If your heart balanced with the feather or proved lighter, then you could proceed to the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise, where the blessed dead spent eternity in perfect contentment. But if your heart proved heavier than the feather, in the shadows at the edge of the hall waited Amit the devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, a creature assembled from the most dangerous animals the Egyptians knew. Her jaws could crush bone, her teeth could tear through anything, and her appetite was infinite. If the scale tipped toward your heavy heart, Amit would step forward and consume it entirely, not just killing you, but erasing you, removing you so completely from existence that you would never have been at all. No afterlife, no reincarnation, no ghostly half-existence, just nothing. The priests who taught this doctrine understood something profound about human nature. They knew that most people, given the choice, would try to live better lives if they truly believed their actions had eternal consequences, not because they feared punishment, but because they understood that who you are in life determines who you become in death. The weighing of the heart was not arbitrary judgment by a cruel God. It was simply the universe's way of reflecting back to you the exact weight of your choices. If you had chosen to be light, honest, kind, truthful, then you would be light. If you had chosen to be heavy, dishonest, cruel, false, then you would be heavy. It was justice of the purest kind, not punishment imposed from outside, but the natural consequence of your own decisions. The feather floats on the scale, impossibly light, impossibly pure. The heart settles beside it, carrying the exact weight of a human life. And in that moment of perfect measurement, truth is revealed not through judgment, but through simple mathematics. Light or heavy, balanced or unbalanced, truth or lies. A feather against a heart, the strangest scale in all the cosmos, and perhaps the most fair. Every night when the sun sets in the western desert and darkness begins to spread across the land, a battle begins. Not a battle that mortals can see, not a war fought with armies and weapons, but something far more fundamental. A conflict between order and chaos, between light and darkness, between existence itself and the void that would swallow it whole. The sun, you see, does not simply disappear when evening comes. It does not rest, does not sleep, does not fade quietly away. Instead, it begins a journey through the underworld, through the duat, that hidden realm beneath the earth where the dead make their own voyages and the laws of the living world hold no sway. This journey takes 12 hours, from sunset to sunrise. 12 hours during which the sun god Ra, in his solar bark, must navigate rivers of fire and caverns of shadow, must pass through gates guarded by monsters and traverse landscapes that exist nowhere else in creation. It is dangerous work, this nightly journey. But the greatest danger waits in the deepest part of the underworld, in the place where darkness is most complete and chaos reigns supreme. There lives Apep. Apep is a serpent, but not like any snake that has ever slithered across the earth. He is impossibly vast. Some say his body could encircle the entire world. Others claim he has no end at all, that he simply goes on and on, coil after coil, disappearing into dimensions that have no names. His scales are black as the space between stars. His eyes burn with hatred older than time. His mouth is large enough to swallow the sun whole, and that is exactly what he tries to do every single night. When Ra's boat enters the deepest part of the underworld, Apep is waiting. He rises from his pit like a mountain of malevolence, his great head weaving back and forth, his forked tongue tasting the air for the scent of light and life. He hates both with a passion that borders on madness, for he is the embodiment of everything that opposes creation, order, meaning. The battle that follows shakes the foundations of reality. Apep strikes with fangs like obsidian spears, each one dripping with venom that could poison the very concept of existence. Ra fights back with light itself as his weapon, with the pure force of creation, with the stubborn insistence that something is better than nothing. Sometimes the battle is brief. Ra's light proves too strong for the serpent's darkness, and Apep retreats to his pit to nurse his wounds and plot tomorrow's attack. On these nights, the sun rises easily, bright and warm and welcoming. But sometimes the battle lasts hours. Sometimes Apep manages to coil his massive body around Ra's boat to drag it down into the depths of chaos. On these nights, the sun rises late and weak, struggling through clouds that seem heavier than they should be. The light feels different, uncertain, as if it barely escaped extinction. And very rarely, perhaps once in a generation, perhaps once in 1,000 years, Apep succeeds. His jaws close around the sun, and for a few terrifying moments, light disappears from the world entirely. This is what the Egyptians believed caused solar eclipses. Not the moon passing in front of the sun, but Apep actually managing to swallow it. The darkness that spreads across the land during an eclipse is the inside of the great serpent's mouth, and the gradual return of light is Ra cutting his way out with blades of pure radiance. The ancient Egyptians took these eclipses very seriously. When the sun began to disappear in the middle of the day, they would drop everything, work, meals, conversations, and begin making noise, shouting, banging pots, playing drums, anything to help Ra in his battle against the serpent. Their voices would rise to the sky like offerings of sound, like weapons made of human will. And it always worked. The sun always returned. The light always won eventually. But the battle never truly ends. Even now, as the sun makes its nightly journey through realms we cannot see, Apep waits in the darkness, patient as eternity, hungry as the void, ready to try once more to swallow light itself. Every sunrise is a victory in this cosmic war. Every dawn is proof that creation is stronger than destruction, that order can overcome chaos, that light will always find a way to return. The serpent coils in the depths, dreaming of darkness. The sun god sails through shadow, carrying tomorrow's light, and the battle continues night after night as it has since the beginning of time, as it will until time itself comes to an end. When you see the sun rise tomorrow morning, remember, it had to fight its way back to you through the coils of the cosmic serpent. It chose to return. It chose to shine. It chose to begin the day. Every sunrise is a gift, wrestled from the jaws of the dragon that would devour the world. In the beginning, there was nothing. Not darkness. Darkness is something. Not emptiness. Emptiness implies a container. There was simply not. No space, no time, no possibility of anything ever being different than it wasn't. And then, from this ultimate nothingness, something stirred. Not because of outside intervention, not because of some cosmic accident, but because existence itself willed itself into being. The Egyptians called this first god Atum. His name means the complete one, though perhaps the self-made one would be more accurate. For Adam had no parents, no creator, no origin outside of his own will to exist. He thought himself into being through pure determination, brought himself forth from nothingness through an act of cosmic self-love. But existence is lonely when you are the only thing that exists. Adam found himself alone in the void, the sole conscious being in all of reality. He was complete, yes, but completion without companionship is just another form of emptiness. So Adam decided to create others like himself. The question was, how? He had no mate, no partner in creation. There was literally nothing else in existence that could help him bring forth new life. This is where the myth becomes, let us say, anatomically specific. Adam raised his hand to his mouth, not to eat, for there was nothing to consume, not to speak, for there was no one to hear. Instead, he performed an act that even the priests who recorded this story seemed slightly embarrassed to describe in detail. Let us simply say that he found a way to create life from his own body, using a method that requires only one participant. From this divine act of self-pleasure came the first emission of creative force. And from this emission, this divine seed, this cosmic essence, sprang the first pair of gods. Shu, the god of air, emerged first. The breath that separates earth from sky. The wind that fills lungs and moves sails and carries the scent of flowers across the desert. Without Shu, nothing could breathe, nothing could move, nothing could live. Tefnut, the goddess of moisture, came next. The dew that forms on lotus petals at dawn, the tears that express joy and sorrow, the life-giving water that makes existence possible in the desert. Without Tefnut, everything would wither and die. Air and moisture, breath and water, the two most essential elements for life, born from Adam's solitary act of creation. Shu and Tefnut looked around at the void they had been born into and understood immediately what needed to happen next. They embraced each other, and from their union came Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess. Geb lay flat and solid, providing foundation for everything that would follow. Nut arched above him like a star-spangled canopy, her body stretched from horizon to horizon. And so the basic structure of reality was established: earth below, sky above, air between them, and moisture to make life possible, all of it arising from Adam's moment of creative self-love. The priests who taught this myth knew how it sounded. They understood that other cultures might find it crude, embarrassing, inappropriate for religious discourse, but they also understood something that perhaps we have forgotten that creation is fundamentally an act of love, and love, even self love, is a sacred force. There is something deeply honest about this myth, something that acknowledges the physical reality behind all existence. Life comes from life. New beings emerge from the creative acts of existing beings. Even gods, apparently, must work with the materials at hand. And there is something beautiful about the idea that existence itself chose to exist, that the universe we live in came into being because consciousness decided that something was better than nothing, that company was better than eternal solitude. Adam stands alone in the beginning, complete but isolated. He finds within himself the power to create, to share existence with others, to transform the void into a cosmos full of life and possibility. His act of self creation becomes an act of love for everything that would ever exist. From the loneliness of the complete God comes the companionships of the many. From the solitude of perfection comes the community of creation. From one comes all through the simple decision that existence is worth bringing into being. Sacred, awkward, both perhaps, but honest in a way that myths rarely are, acknowledging that the force that drives creation is also the force that drives life, love, and the irrepressible urge to make something from nothing. The God creates himself, then creates others, then watches as they create still more. And all of it begins with the simple recognition that being alone is not enough, that true completeness requires sharing existence with others. Adam smiles in the void, no longer alone, surrounded by the family he made from his own essence. The first father, the original creator, the God who loved existence into being. Death, to the ancient Egyptians, was not an ending, but a transformation. Not a door closing, but a door opening onto something new and strange and wonderful. They had learned this lesson not from priests or philosophers, but from watching beetles, small, dark beetles that spent their lives rolling balls of dung across the desert sand. Beetles that seemed to appear from nowhere, emerging from what looked like dead matter, as if spontaneously generated by some mysterious force. The Egyptians watched these creatures with fascination. They saw the beetles gather dung, waste material, discarded matter, the refuse of life, and shape it into perfect spheres. They saw them roll these spheres to safe places, bury them in the sand, tend them with care that seemed almost parental. And then, after days or weeks of patient waiting, they saw new beetles emerge, whole and perfect and alive, crawling out of what had seemed like nothing more than balls of waste. Life from death, being from decay, existence from what appeared to be non-existence. This was magic of the purest kind, and the Egyptians recognized it immediately. Here, in the humblest of creatures, was proof that death was not final, that life could emerge from the most unlikely places, that transformation was woven into the very fabric of existence. They gave this power a name, Khepri, the god of becoming, of transformation, of the eternal process by which one thing changes into another. Sometimes he was shown as a man with a beetle's head, sometimes as a beetle with the sun balanced on its back, sometimes as a scarab pushing the solar disk across the sky, like his earthly cousins push their balls of dung. But it was as the god of rebirth that Khepri was most beloved. The Egyptians carved his image in stone and metal, wore it as jewelry, painted it on tomb walls. The scarab became the symbol of resurrection, of the promise that death was not an ending, but a beginning. When someone died, their mummy would be wrapped with scarab amulets tucked between the bandages. These were not just decorations, but tools, magical implements that would help the deceased transform from their current state of death into their future state of eternal life. The scarab would teach them how to emerge from the darkness of the tomb, just as the beetle emerged from the darkness of the dung ball. The transformation was not automatic. Like the beetle, the dead person had to work at it. They had to navigate the challenges of the underworld, pass tests, prove their worthiness. But the scarab amulets reminded them that transformation was possible, that they carried within themselves the same power that allowed beetles to turn waste into life. In the tomb paintings, you can see this process depicted with loving detail. The deceased stands before Khepri, arms raised in supplication. The beetle god extends his protection, his promise that death is temporary, that resurrection awaits those who understand the secret of transformation. The secret was simple but profound, that nothing in the universe is ever truly lost, only changed. The dung that seems worthless becomes the cradle of new life. The body that seems dead becomes the cocoon from which the soul emerges transformed. The ending that seems final becomes the beginning of something new. This was not just religious doctrine, but observed fact. The Egyptians lived in a desert where life seemed impossible, yet life persisted. They lived beside a river that died and was reborn every year with the flood. They lived under a sun that died every evening and was reborn every morning. Transformation was all around them, visible in everything from the changing seasons to the metamorphosis of insects. The beetle taught them that apparent death might be apparent life waiting to emerge, that the darkest moments might be the necessary prelude to the brightest transformations, that what looks like an ending might actually be a beginning disguised in clothing too strange for human eyes to recognize. Khepri rolls his ball across the cosmic sand, patient and purposeful. Inside that sphere of apparent waste, new life gestates. Inside the darkness, light prepares to be born. Inside the death, resurrection waits for its moment to emerge. The god pushes tomorrow across the sky, hidden in today's dying light. The beetle teaches the eternal lesson, that every end is a beginning, every death a birth, every transformation a small miracle that happens too often to be noticed, but too important to be ignored. From dung comes life, from death comes resurrection. From the beetle comes the wisdom that nothing ever truly ends, everything only changes, and change itself is the most sacred force in all creation. The scarab emerges from darkness into light, carrying tomorrow on its back, teaching the universe how to be born again and again and again. When you died in ancient Egypt, you did not die as one thing. You did not simply stop being yourself and become nothing. Instead, you separated, like light passing through a prism, breaking apart into component colors that had always been there, hidden within the seeming simplicity of white radiance. The Egyptians understood something that we have largely forgotten, that the self is not simple, not singular, not one unified thing wearing the costume of personality. Instead, the self is complex, multiple, a symphony of different aspects that work together to create the illusion of unity. 5 parts, they said. 5 different aspects of the soul, each with its own nature, its own needs, its own destination after death. First was the Ka, your spiritual double, your divine twin who was born at the same moment you were, but existed in a different realm. The Ka was everything you were, but perfected. Your desires without your limitations, your potential without your failures, your essence without your accidents. When you died, the Ka was what survived most completely, what carried forward into the afterlife to be judged and weighed, and potentially reborn. But the Ka needed sustenance, just as your physical body had. This was why the Egyptians left food offerings in tombs, why they painted banquet scenes on tomb walls, why they created elaborate systems to ensure the dead were fed. The Ka could starve, could waste away, could die a second death if not properly nourished. Second was the Ba, your personality, your individual characteristics, everything that made you distinctly you rather than someone else. The Ba was often depicted as a bird with a human head, able to fly between the world of the living and the world of the dead. During the day, it might visit your tomb, your favorite places, the people you had loved. At night, it would return to your mummy, reuniting temporarily with your physical remains. The Ba was the part of you that mourners remembered when they spoke your name. It carried your quirks, your habits, your way of laughing or frowning or solving problems. Without the Ba, you would exist, but you would not be you. You would be generic, interchangeable, lacking the specific flavor that had defined your living existence. Third was the Ak, your spiritual effectiveness, your ability to act in the realm of the gods. Not everyone achieved Ak. It had to be earned through proper living, correct burial, successful navigation of the afterlife's challenges. Those who became Ak were blessed spirits who could intercede for the living, who could influence events in the mortal world, who had achieved a kind of spiritual mastery. The Ak was light, literally. It was the radiance that surrounded the blessed dead, the glow that marked them as having transcended ordinary existence. To become Ak was to become effective in the cosmic order, to join the ranks of powers that kept the universe functioning properly. Fourth was your name, and this was not just a label, not just a sound used to get your attention. Your name was power, was identity made manifest, was the magical formula that called you into existence and kept you existing. To know someone's true name was to have power over them. To forget someone's name was to begin erasing them from reality. This was why the Egyptians carved names on tomb walls, why they repeated them in prayers, why they feared above all else that their names might be forgotten. Without your name, the other parts of your soul could not find each other, could not reunite, could not continue existing as a coherent whole. The pharaohs had their names carved in cartouches, oval frames that protected the hieroglyphs from harm, ensuring that the royal names would persist as long as the stone endured. But even common people understood the power of names, the necessity of being remembered by sound and symbol. Fifth was your shadow, and this was perhaps the strangest aspect of all. Your shadow was not just the dark shape cast by your body blocking light. It was your hidden self, your unconscious nature, the part of you that existed whether you acknowledged it or not. The shadow knew things your conscious mind did not, remembered things you had forgotten, understood truths you refused to face. In the afterlife, the shadow could help or hinder your journey. If you had lived in harmony with your hidden nature, if you had acknowledged your darkness without being ruled by it, the shadow would be an ally. But if you had denied your shadow, ignored it, pretended it did not exist, it could become an opponent, sabotaging your efforts to achieve eternal life. These five aspects, Ka, Ba, Ak, name, and shadow, could separate at death and go their own ways. They might reunite in the afterlife if all went well, but they might also scatter, each one following its own nature to its own destination. This was why proper burial was so important, why the mummification process was so elaborate, why prayers and offerings continued for years after death. The goal was integration, reunification, the gathering together of all five aspects into a coherent whole that could exist eternally. But this was not automatic. It required effort, understanding, preparation. It required that you know yourself not as one simple thing, but as five complex things working together. In life, most people are not aware of these different aspects. They experience themselves as unified, singular, whole. But death reveals the truth that the self is multiple, that consciousness is a collaboration between different kinds of awareness, that what we call I is actually we in disguise. The ancient Egyptians mapped this multiplicity with careful precision, understanding that the afterlife was not just about continuing to exist, but about learning to exist more completely, more consciously, with fuller awareness of the complexity that had always been there. 5 parts of the soul, 5 different kinds of existence, 5 ways of being real. The challenge was not to choose between them, but to integrate them, to become all 5 things at once, to achieve the kind of unified multiplicity that the gods themselves embodied. The soul divides to reveal its true nature. The self separates to discover its wholeness. The person dies to learn what it really means to be alive. Stone should not speak. Granite and marble and limestone are silent by nature, formed in the deep places of the earth where sound has never been and communication happens through pressure and heat and the slow dance of geological time. Yet in ancient Egypt, statues talked, not all statues, and not to everyone, but under the right circumstances, with the proper rituals, when the stars aligned and the gods were willing, the carved figures in temples and tombs would open their stone lips and speak with voices that carried the authority of eternity. The Egyptians understood something that we have forgotten, that consciousness is not limited to flesh and blood, that awareness can inhabit any form if the conditions are right, that the divine can take up residence in wood and stone and metal just as easily as in human bodies. This was not primitive superstition, but sophisticated spiritual technology. The process of animating a statue began with the carving itself. Every line had to be perfect, every proportion exactly right, every detail crafted with the kind of attention that comes from understanding that you are not just making decoration, but creating a potential dwelling place for a god. The most important part was the eyes. If the eyes were carved correctly, if they captured not just the shape, but the essence of vision, then they could serve as windows through which divine consciousness could look out into the world. Many statues were found with their eyes deliberately damaged, as if someone had feared what might be looking through them. Once the carving was complete, the statue had to be consecrated through a ritual called the opening of the mouth. Priests would touch special tools to the statue's lips, eyes, and ears, awakening its senses one by one. They would speak the secret names that called the gods' attention, would make offerings that attracted divine presence, would perform ceremonies that transformed carved stone into living vessel. But the most crucial element was the name. Names in ancient Egypt were not just labels. They were formulae of power, magical equations that defined the very essence of what they named. To know someone's true name was to have power over them. To speak a god's name correctly was to compel their attention. To carve a name in stone was to make it permanent, eternal, unbreakable. The most powerful names were hidden, kept secret by the gods themselves. There was a story about Isis, the goddess of magic, who tricked the sun god Ra into revealing his secret name by poisoning him with a serpent and offering to heal him only if he told her his true name. Once she possessed this knowledge, she became his equal in power, able to command the forces of creation itself. But you did not need to know a god's secret name to gain some measure of power. Even the public names, the ones carved on temple walls and spoken in prayers, carried authority. If you pronounced them correctly with proper respect and understanding, they would open doors that mere human will could never budge. This was why scribes were so highly valued in Egyptian society. They were not just record keepers, but magicians, masters of the written word, keepers of the formulae that made communication with the divine possible. A scribe who knew the right names, who could write them in the proper hieroglyphs, who understood their pronunciation and meaning, was a person of tremendous power. The statues and temples served as intermediaries between the human and divine worlds. Petitioners would approach them with offerings and prayers, speaking their requests to the carved figures. If the ritual was performed correctly, if the offering was appropriate, if the need was genuine, the statue might respond. Sometimes the response was subtle, a slight change in the statue's expression, a feeling of warmth or coolness emanating from the stone, a sense of presence that had not been there before. But sometimes the response was unmistakable. The statue would speak, its voice emerging from lips that had never drawn breath, offering advice or prophecy or divine command. The most famous of these oracular statues was the Great Sphinx at Giza. Pilgrims would travel from across the ancient world to sleep between its paws and receive dreams sent by the god who dwelt within its leonine form. Kings and commoners alike sought its counsel, believing that the wisdom of eternity spoke through its stone throat. Even the dead could inhabit statues. Tomb sculptures were not just memorials, but potential dwelling places for the souls of the deceased. If the proper rituals were performed, if the offerings were maintained, if the names were remembered and spoken, the dead could return to inhabit their carved likenesses, could speak with visitors, could continue to participate in the world of the living. This was why tomb robbers were so feared and despised. They were not just stealing treasure, but committing a kind of murder, destroying the possibility of communication between the living and the dead, severing the connections that allowed consciousness to move between different forms of existence. The power of names extended beyond statues to all forms of representation. A person's name, written in hieroglyphs, was not just a record, but a living thing, a piece of their essence trapped in symbols. To erase someone's name was to begin erasing them from existence. To preserve someone's name was to grant them a kind of immortality. Kings understood this better than anyone. They had their names carved in cartouches, oval frames that protected the hieroglyphs from harm, magical barriers that kept the royal essence safe from destruction. Even in death, even when their bodies had crumbled to dust, their names lived on in stone, maintaining their presence in the world through the power of written symbols. The statues wait in their temples and tombs, their stone eyes watching, their carved ears listening for the proper names, the correct pronunciations, the magical formulae that will awaken them from their patient sleep. They are not decorations, but doorways, not art, but technology, not mere stone, but potential vessels for consciousness itself. Speak the right name in the right way, and stone becomes flesh. Carve the proper symbols with sufficient skill, and art becomes life. Understand the connection between word and reality, between name and essence, and you hold in your hands the same power the gods used to speak the universe into existence. The statues remember the names remember the gods, and the gods, when called correctly, still sometimes remember to answer. After death, after the journey through the underworld, after all the trials and tests that souls must face in the realm beyond the living, you find yourself standing in the most important courtroom that has ever existed. The Hall of Two Truths stretches before you, vast as a cathedral, silent as the space between stars. But you are not alone. Watching you from their thrones of judgment sit 42 gods, each one responsible for examining a different aspect of moral conduct. 42 divine judges who have been waiting since the beginning of time to ask you their questions. These are not ordinary questions. These are not inquiries designed to gather information or test your knowledge. These are questions that cut straight to the heart of who you are, what you have done, how you have lived. Questions that demand not explanation, but simple truth, yes or no, guilty or innocent, worthy or unworthy. The first judge leans forward, his eyes holding the weight of eons. Have you killed? He asks, and his voice resonates in your bones. Have you taken life from those who deserved to live? If you have killed in war, in self-defense, in protection of the innocent, this may not condemn you. But if you have killed in anger, in greed, in cold blood for personal gain, the weight of that choice settles on your heart like a stone. The second judge speaks. Have you stolen? Have you taken what belonged to others? Have you enriched yourself at the expense of those who trusted you? Again, the context matters, but the judges see through justifications and rationalizations. They know the difference between taking bread to feed starving children and taking gold to feed personal greed. They know which theft serves life and which serves only selfish appetite. Have you lied? Asks the third judge. Have you spoken falsehood when truth was required? Have you deceived others for your own benefit? The questions continue, relentless and thorough. Have you committed adultery? Have you been proud when humility was called for? Have you wasted food while others went hungry? Have you caused tears in others' eyes? Have you been hot-tempered? Have you gossiped maliciously? Have you stopped your ears against the words of truth? Some questions seem almost petty by modern standards. Have you wasted water? Have you raised your voice unnecessarily? Have you been impatient? But the Egyptians understood that character is revealed not just in grand gestures, but in small daily choices, not just in moments of crisis, but in the accumulated habits of ordinary life. Other questions cut deeper. Have you caused pain to others? Have you felt satisfaction in others' suffering? Have you turned away from those who needed help you could have provided? Have you broken faith with those who trusted you? Each question must be answered honestly. The Hall of Two Truths is not a place where lies can survive. Deception here is impossible, not because of magical compulsion, but because the setting itself, the presence of absolute justice, makes dishonesty literally unthinkable. You cannot lie to yourself here, cannot pretend to be other than what you are. Some souls answer no to every question, their hearts light with lives well lived, their consciences clear. They have made mistakes, certainly. All mortals do, but their mistakes were errors of judgment, rather than failures of character, moments of ignorance, rather than moments of malice. Others find themselves answering yes, again and again, each admission adding weight to their hearts, each confession making their souls heavier. They remember the times they chose comfort over compassion, the moments they put their own desires above others' needs, the decisions that served their egos rather than their better angels. But perhaps most souls find themselves somewhere in between, flawed but trying, imperfect but growing, guilty of some things but innocent of others. They answer yes to some questions, no to others, creating a complex portrait of moral reality that defies simple categorization. The judges do not comment on the answers. They do not offer forgiveness or condemnation. They simply record each response, noting the weight it adds to or removes from the heart that will soon be placed on the cosmic scales. Have you been grateful for the gifts you received? Asks one judge near the end of the questioning. Have you used your blessings to bless others? Have you remembered that everything you had was given to you, not earned by you alone? And finally, the last question, perhaps the most important of all. Have you learned? Have you grown? Are you leaving life wiser and kinder than when you entered it? This may be the question that matters most. Not whether you made mistakes, everyone does, but whether you learned from them. Not whether you were perfect, no one is, but whether you tried to become better. Not whether you achieved sainthood, few do, but whether you moved in that direction, however slowly, however imperfectly. The 42 judges lean back in their thrones, their questioning complete. Your answers hang in the air like visible things, each one adding its measure to the total weight of your existence. Soon, your heart will be placed on the scales, and that weight will be measured against the feather of truth. But the questions themselves have already changed you. To answer them honestly is to see yourself clearly, perhaps for the first time. To face them without flinching is to accept responsibility for the choices that have made you who you are. The judges wait in eternal patience, ready to ask their questions of every soul that enters their hall. 42 examinations of conscience, 42 opportunities for honesty, 42 chances to face the truth of what it means to be human. The questions echo in the vast hall, seeking not punishment, but understanding, not condemnation, but clarity. Yes or no, guilty or innocent, heavy or light. The scales await the answers. The feather waits to measure their weight. And somewhere in the balance between question and response, between truth and consequence, justice prepares to reveal itself in its purest form. In the shadows at the edge of the hall of two truths, something waits with infinite patience, something that has been waiting since the first human soul stood before the scales of justice and will wait until the last soul faces its final judgment. Something that embodies not cruelty, but necessity, not evil, but the harsh mathematics of cosmic balance. Her name is Amit, and she is assembled from nightmares, part crocodile, with jaws that can crush stone and teeth like ivory daggers, part lion, with haunches of pure muscle and claws that could tear through anything, part hippopotamus, with the massive bulk of an animal that seems peaceful until it reveals itself as one of the most dangerous creatures in all of Africa. The Egyptians knew these animals well. They lived alongside them, feared them, respected them. They understood that the crocodile was patience itself, able to wait motionless for hours until prey came within reach. They knew that the lion was power incarnate, capable of bringing down animals many times its size. They had seen how the hippopotamus, despite its deceptively placid appearance, could overturn boats and crush humans with casual ease. From these three they assembled Amit, creating a creature that embodied not random violence, but focused, purposeful destruction. She was not evil. The Egyptians did not conceive of her as a malevolent force. Instead, she was necessity made manifest, the cosmic function that removed from existence what could not be integrated into the eternal order. She sits perfectly still beside the scales, her great head resting on paws that could crush mountains. Her crocodile eyes never blink, never close, never look away from the ceremony of judgment. She watches every soul that enters the hall, evaluates every heart that is placed upon the scales, waits for the verdict that will determine whether her services are required. Most of the time, she is not needed. Most hearts, when weighed against the feather of truth, prove balanced or nearly so. Their owners proceed to the field of reeds, or choose to return to earthly life, or find some other form of eternal existence. Amit remains still, patient, unnecessary. But sometimes, not often, but inevitably, the scales tip the wrong way. A heart proves too heavy, weighted down with cruelty and selfishness and the accumulated debris of a life lived without regard for others. When this happens, Amit rises. She moves with surprising grace for something so massive, her powerful body flowing like water despite its bulk. She approaches the condemned soul not with anger or satisfaction, but with the calm efficiency of one performing a necessary task. This is her function, her purpose, the reason she exists. Her jaws open, revealing a mouth large enough to swallow the sun. The crocodile teeth gleam white as bone, sharp as broken glass. The lion's strength coils in her muscles, ready to apply the force that will complete her work. The hippopotamus bulk provides the mass necessary to contain and process what she is about to consume. And then, in one swift motion, she devours the heavy heart, not just eating it, but consuming it so completely that it ceases to exist. The soul it belonged to simply ends, not death. Death is transition, movement from one state to another. This is obliteration, the complete removal of something from the cosmic ledger. The soul that Amit devours does not go to an afterlife. It does not suffer eternal punishment. It does not linger as a ghost or spirit. It simply stops, as if it had never been at all. Every memory of it fades from the minds of the living. Every trace of its existence vanishes from reality. Even its name disappears from the records of time. This is not cruelty, but bookkeeping, the universe's way of maintaining balance by removing what cannot be balanced. It is mercy of a sort, the prevention of eternal suffering through the gift of eternal nothingness. But Amit herself takes no pleasure in this work. She does not hunt for victims or seek out heavy hearts to devour. She simply waits, patient as stone, ready to perform her function when called upon. She is the cosmic garbage disposal, the universal delete button, the final solution to the problem of souls that cannot be redeemed. Between judgments, she sleeps. Her great body curls in on itself like a cat, her breathing slow and deep. She dreams, perhaps, of the time before creation when there was nothing to judge, nothing to devour, nothing to balance. Or perhaps she dreams of the time to come when all souls will have been weighed and all debts settled, and her services will no longer be required. The other gods treat her with respectful wariness. They understand her necessity, but do not enjoy her company. She is the shadow side of justice, the uncomfortable truth that balance sometimes requires removal, that not everything can be redeemed or reformed or forgiven. But she is also a teacher, though she never speaks. Her presence in the Hall of Two Truths serves as a reminder to every soul being judged. Choices have consequences. Character has weight. The way you live determines not just how you die, but whether you continue to exist at all. The threat of Amit makes every decision significant. Knowing that your heart will eventually be weighed against the feather of truth gives weight to every choice, every action, every moment when you decide between kindness and cruelty, truth and falsehood, service and selfishness. She is the monster that makes morality meaningful, the consequences that give significance to conscience. Without her, the scales would be just ceremony, judgment would be just theater, morality would be just opinion. Amit waits in the shadows, patient as time itself, necessary as balance, final as mathematics. She hopes never to be needed, but she is always ready, always watching, always prepared to perform the ultimate subtraction, the cosmic deletion that ensures the universe's books remain balanced. The scales tip one way or another. The feather rises or falls. And in the shadows, the devourer waits to see whether her services will be required once more. When the sun sets in the western desert and darkness spreads across the land, it does not simply disappear. It does not rest, does not sleep, does not fade quietly into nothing. Instead, it begins a journey through a realm that exists beneath and beyond and inside the world we know, a realm the Egyptians called the Duat. This is not the underworld as we might imagine it, not a simple cave or cavern beneath the earth. The Duat is a dimension unto itself, a space that occupies the same location as ordinary reality, but operates by entirely different rules. It is the place where the dead make their journey toward judgment, where gods battle monsters, where the very fabric of existence is constantly rewoven by forces beyond mortal comprehension. The journey through the Duat takes 12 hours, the 12 hours of night when the sun god Ra travels from west to east to be reborn at dawn. But these are not ordinary hours. Time moves differently here, stretching and compressing according to the needs of the story being told, the trial being faced, the transformation being undergone. The entrance to the Duat lies at the western horizon, where the sun appears to sink into the desert sand. Here stands the gate of the west, guarded by beings whose names were old when the pyramids were young. To pass this gate, you must know their names, must speak the words of power that identify you as one who belongs in this realm. Beyond the gate, the landscape of the Duat unfolds in impossible vistas. Rivers of fire flow uphill, their flames cold as ice. Mountains of crystal rise from plains of liquid starlight. Forests of stone trees bear fruit made of crystallized song. The sky, if it can be called a sky, is a canopy of woven darkness shot through with veins of gold. But the journey is not a sightseeing tour. It is a test, a trial, a process of purification that transforms those who survive it. At every step, challenges await, monsters that must be faced or avoided, riddles that must be solved, gates that demand specific knowledge before they will open. Some obstacles are physical, serpents of living shadow that try to wrap themselves around travelers' limbs, lakes of acid that must be crossed on boats made of prayers, winds that blow with such force they can scatter a soul like dust if it lacks sufficient cohesion. Other challenges are psychological, mirrors that show not your reflection but your regrets, voices that whisper all your secret shames, phantoms of people you have wronged, demanding explanations you cannot give. These tests probe not your knowledge, but your character, not what you know, but who you are. The first hour of the journey is the hour of recognition, when souls must identify themselves to the guardians of the Duat. Without a name, without identity, without the ability to say who you are and where you came from, you cannot proceed. Many souls fail this first test, dissolving back into the undifferentiated void from which all consciousness emerges. The second hour is the hour of memory, when the trials begin in earnest. This is where souls encounter the river of forgetfulness, not a river that makes you forget, but a river that shows you everything you have already forgotten, all the moments from your life that seemed too small to matter, but actually shaped who you became. The third hour brings the chamber of echoes, where every word you ever spoke aloud is repeated back to you. Kind words ring with silver bells. Cruel words scrape like fingernails on stone. Lies taste like ash in your mouth. Truths shine with their own inner light. Hours 4 through 6 form the heart of the Duat, where the greatest dangers and the greatest opportunities wait. Here stands the palace of Osiris, where the god of the dead holds court, and souls can petition for mercy, for wisdom, for the strength to continue their journey. But here also lurk the servants of Apep, the chaos serpent, trying to prevent souls from reaching their final destination. The seventh hour is the hour of judgment, when souls face their first weighing, not the final judgment in the Hall of Two Truths, but a preliminary assessment that determines whether they are worthy to continue. Some souls turn back here, choosing the known horrors of the earlier hours over the unknown challenges that lie ahead. Hours 8 and 9 comprise the Valley of Decision, where souls must choose their path forward. Multiple routes present themselves, each leading to different outcomes. The path of glory leads to potential godhood, but requires perfect courage. The path of wisdom leads to eternal knowledge, but demands the sacrifice of all earthly attachments. The path of love leads to reunion with all you have cherished, but requires forgiveness of all who have wronged you. The 10th hour is the hour of transformation, where souls begin to shed their earthly forms and take on the shapes they will wear in eternity. This is often the most painful part of the journey, as the false self, the ego, the persona, the collection of habits and fears and desires that masqueraded as identity, is burned away in fires that purify without consuming. The 11th hour brings the plain of reeds, a preview of the paradise that awaits the blessed dead. Here souls can rest, can remember what they are journeying toward, can gather strength for the final challenge. But they cannot stay, not yet. The test is not complete. And in the 12th hour comes the hall of two truths, where the final judgment awaits, where hearts are weighed against feathers, where the accumulated weight of a lifetime of choices is measured against the lightness of absolute truth. But even this is not the end of the journey. Those who pass the final judgment must still find their way to their chosen destination, the field of reeds, the solar bark of Ra, the stars themselves, and those who fail, well, their journey ends in Amit's jaws. The Duat is not just a place, but a process, not just a location, but a transformation. It takes ordinary souls and subjects them to extraordinary pressures, burning away everything that is false or weak or temporary, leaving only what is true and strong and eternal. Every soul must make this journey alone, but no soul makes it unchanged. The Duat sees to that. It is the cosmic refinery where raw consciousness is processed into something worthy of eternity, or dissolved back into the raw materials from which new consciousness can be formed. The sun completes its nightly journey and rises in the east, reborn and renewed. And somewhere in the Duat, other souls begin their own journeys toward dawn, toward judgment, toward whatever form of eternity they have earned through the choices of a single, precious, temporary life. Look up at the moon tonight, if you can see it through the clouds and city lights. Notice how it changes from night to night, sometimes full and bright, sometimes a thin crescent, sometimes hidden entirely in the darkness of new moon. We know now about orbits and angles, about the mechanics of how sunlight reflects off the lunar surface. But the ancient Egyptians saw something different when they looked up at that changing light. They saw an eye, a divine eye that had been torn from its owner's face in a battle that shook the foundations of creation itself. The eye belonged to Horus, the falcon-headed god whose right eye was the sun and whose left eye was the moon. Horus was young and fierce and passionate, the rightful heir to his father Osiris's throne. But his uncle Set, god of chaos, storms, and the desert, had other plans. Set was jealous of his brother Osiris, jealous of Osiris's power and popularity and perfect marriage to their sister Isis. In a moment of rage that would echo through eternity, Set murdered Osiris, tearing his body into pieces and scattering them across Egypt. It was the first murder, the first act of senseless violence, the moment when death entered a world that had known only life. When Horus learned of his father's death, his grief transformed into fury. He challenged Set to single combat, demanding justice for the murder, vengeance for the crime that had orphaned him and widowed his mother. The battle that followed was unlike anything the world had seen before or since. They fought in the air, their wings casting shadows across entire kingdoms. They fought on the ground, their struggles creating valleys and mountains. They fought in forms both divine and animal, as gods with the heads of falcons and strange beasts, as actual falcons tearing at each other with beaks and talons, as forces of nature itself locked in cosmic conflict. The battle raged for days, for weeks, for months. Neither god could gain decisive advantage over the other. Horus was younger and stronger, but Set was cunning and ruthless. Each time one seemed ready to claim victory, the other would rally and continue the fight. Finally, in a moment of desperate strategy, Set struck at what he knew would hurt Horus most. Not his body, not his pride, but his ability to see, his power to watch over the world, to serve as the eyes of heaven itself. Set's claws found Horus's left eye, the moon, and tore it from his head in a spray of divine blood. The eye shattered as it fell, breaking into 6 pieces that scattered across the sky like fragments of shattered pearl. Instantly, the night sky went dark. The moon that had provided gentle light to guide travelers and lovers and all who moved in darkness simply vanished. Horus screamed in pain and rage, but the damage was done. His left eye was gone, his vision halved, his power diminished. For the first time in the battle, Set had struck a blow that truly mattered, but the other gods could not let this stand. The moon was not just Horus's eye, but the nightlight of the entire world. Without it, darkness became absolute, navigation became impossible, the rhythms of life that depended on lunar cycles fell into chaos. Thoth, the god of wisdom and healing, gathered up the 6 fragments of the shattered eye. With magic older than time and skill honed over eons of practice, he began the delicate work of restoration. Piece by piece, he reassembled the moon eye, fitting the fragments together like a cosmic puzzle. But such wounds do not heal cleanly, even with divine intervention. When Thoth finished his work, the eye was whole again, but it was not the same. The places where it had broken remained visible as scars, dark lines and shadows that marked where the fragments had been rejoined. This is why the moon changes, the Egyptians taught. It is not growing or shrinking, but healing and being wounded again in an endless cycle. Each month, the eye of Horus is torn apart and reassembled, the trauma of that cosmic battle playing out over and over in the night sky. When the moon is dark, that is the moment of wounding, the eye torn from Horus's head, shattered and scattered. When the crescent appears, that is Thoth beginning his work of restoration. As the moon waxes, more and more fragments are reunited. The full moon represents the moment of complete healing, when the eye is whole and perfect once more. But the healing never lasts. The next night, the process begins to reverse. The eye begins to break apart again, the fragments separating, the light dimming. Not because of any new battle, but because some wounds are so fundamental that they exist outside of time, repeating eternally, never fully healed, but never completely destroyed. The scars remain visible on the lunar surface, the dark areas we call Maria, the shadows that give the full moon its familiar face. To the Egyptians, these were not geological features, but the permanent marks of divine trauma, reminders that even gods can be wounded, even cosmic powers can be broken and imperfectly mended. But there is something beautiful in this story, something that speaks to the resilience of light itself. Despite being shattered, despite being scattered, despite bearing permanent scars, the eye of Horus continues to shine. It returns each month, renewed if not restored, providing light to the darkness, even though it will never be the same as it was before the battle. The moon rises tonight, carrying its ancient scars, telling its story of wounding and healing to anyone who knows how to read the language of light and shadow. It is beautiful not in spite of its brokenness, but because of it, luminous not because it has never been damaged, but because it has learned to shine through the cracks. The eye of Horus watches over the night, scarred but seeing, broken but beautiful, wounded but eternal. It is the moon, forever changing, forever the same, forever telling the story of how even the most terrible damage can be transformed into a different kind of wholeness. Strange, aren't they? These stories from the banks of the ancient Nile, these myths that tried to make sense of a world that often made no sense at all. A beetle-headed god pushing the sun across the sky. A lioness goddess who had to be tricked into drunkenness to save humanity. A cosmic serpent that tries to swallow light itself night after night in an eternal battle that determines whether tomorrow will come. Perhaps they seem ridiculous to our modern minds, accustomed as we are to satellites and GPS, to weather prediction and scientific explanation. We know now about planetary rotation and solar radiation, about atmospheric pressure and lunar phases. We can explain the sunrise without invoking divine beetles, understand eclipses without imagining cosmic serpents. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the ancient Egyptians weren't trying to write textbooks or create scientific theories. Maybe they were trying to do something else entirely, to find meaning in mystery, to discover purpose in chaos, to create connections between the human heart and the vast indifference of the cosmos. The beetle pushes the sun because work matters, because someone has to do the necessary tasks that keep the world running. The lioness has to be calmed with beer because even divine forces can get carried away, because power without restraint becomes destruction. The heart is weighed against a feather because truth is lighter than lies, because simplicity is more beautiful than complexity, because at the end of everything, what matters is not what you accomplished, but how you treated others along the way. These myths are not primitive science, but sophisticated psychology, not failed astronomy, but successful poetry. They speak to parts of the mind that facts and figures can never reach, to places in the soul that require not explanation, but imagination, not proof, but possibility. In our time, we have gained much knowledge, but perhaps lost some wisdom. We can measure the distance to stars, but struggle to understand the distance between hearts. We can explain how the brain produces consciousness, but remain mystified by what consciousness actually is. We can predict the weather, but cannot predict whether we will be happy tomorrow. The ancient Egyptians lived in a world full of mystery, and instead of being frightened by that mystery, they embraced it. They created stories that transformed the unknown into the meaningful, the inexplicable into the beautiful. They looked at death and saw transformation, at chaos and saw the raw material of order. at endings and saw beginnings in disguise. Their gods were not perfect beings dispensing wisdom from celestial heights. They were complicated, flawed, passionate beings who made mistakes and learned from them, who struggled with the same fundamental questions that plague human hearts. How do we find meaning in suffering? How do we live with the knowledge that we will die? How do we love in a world that seems so often loveless? The sun still rises each morning, pushed by forces we understand better than the Egyptians ever could. But understanding the mechanism does not diminish the miracle. Knowing about fusion and radiation does not make the sunrise less beautiful, less necessary, less worthy of reverence. The moon still changes in its ancient cycle, its face scarred by cosmic history we can now read in geological terms. But the scars are still beautiful, the changes still mysterious, the light still capable of inspiring wonder, in hearts that remain open to mystery. Let these ancient images drift in your mind as you settle into sleep. Let them mingle with your dreams, these visions of beetle gods and lion goddesses, of weighing hearts and devouring monsters. They are gifts from ancestors who looked at the same stars you see, who wondered about the same mysteries you wonder about, who tried to make sense of existence with the same tools we all have: imagination, hope, and the irrepressible human need to find meaning in the beautiful chaos of being alive. The stories fade now, like incense smoke dispersing in the desert wind. The gods return to their eternal tasks, pushing suns, weighing hearts, battling serpents, healing broken eyes. The ancient world recedes into the distance from which it came, leaving only whispers of wisdom and fragments of wonder. And if sleep finds you now, in this quiet moment between story and dream, between waking and rest, let it take you gently. Let it carry you on currents as old as the Nile itself, toward dreams that might be myth and myths that might be dreams. The desert wind blows softly across the sand. The stars wheel in their eternal dance. And somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, the ancient stories continue, as they always have, as they always will. Rest now, dream well, and remember, when morning comes, that every sunrise is a small miracle, every day a new story waiting to be told. The myths sleep, the dreamers wake, and the eternal dance continues.